الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونؤمن به ونتوكل عليه ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome to the first lecture that we're going to have today. And as it's been announced, the title of the lecture has been given Etiquettes of Seeking Fatwa. It might sound a bit boring in comparison to the rest of the titles, and inshallah I'll try my best to make this lecture as interesting as possible, because this topic is related to all of us. Any Muslim living anywhere in any time who is not a mujtahid, who is not qualified to arrive at the rulings of Allah Azza wa Jal independently, is required to understand this topic. And inshallah this topic is a very simple topic to understand, because this topic is developed for laymen like myself and you, and therefore the people are not required to have deep understanding of the Sharia in order to understand the issues that we'll be discussing today, inshallah. As said, the title of this lecture is Etiquettes of Seeking Fatwa. Scholars, when they usually speak about this topic, they write comprehensive literature regarding this topic, and they usually call it Adabul Ifta and Istifta, or the manners of and etiquette of giving fatwa and seeking fatwa. However, I restricted the title to the etiquettes of seeking fatwa. Why is it echoing so much? I restricted the topic to the etiquettes of seeking fatwa because there's no one amongst us, present at least anyway, who is able to issue verdicts on Allah's behalf. And therefore it will be pointless for me to speak about the etiquettes of giving fatwa to an audience who are non-muftis, including myself. And it's a bit introduction to this topic. Basically, Ifta, or the term Ifta, means issuing a verdict. What it means is for a person to speak about Allah Azza wa Jal in matters of religion, or even worldly matters that are regulated by religion. So whenever a person says, this is the hukum of Allah Azza wa Jal, or this is halal, or this is haram, that statement itself is giving fatwa, whether the one who says it realizes it or not. And then obviously follows an issue: this person, is he really qualified to say this is halal, this is haram? And that's what we will go into later on, inshallah. But this the process of ifta was something that is needed by all communities throughout the ages, from the beginning of this world, by for any community to succeed in this life. And this is one of the major reasons why Allah Azza wa Jal sent prophets and messengers who will take up the roles as muftis, in the sense that the people will ask them questions about life, about the hereafter. And these messengers will receive revelation from Allah Azza wa Jal and speak on Allah's behalf with authority. And this is exactly the role of the Prophet ﷺ in his time. The Sahaba will ask him about many issues, and he will answer them according to what he learns from revelation. And when he passed away, the scholars took over his position. Even though they didn't have direct access to revelation, they had access to the revelation that was sent to the Prophet ﷺ, the Quran and the Sunnah. And therefore they will refer to those sources. And after becoming fully qualified in this field, they will be able to take up the role of the Prophet ﷺ and issuing fatwa and speaking on Allah's behalf. So you had a golden period in Islamic history where people will flock the doors of scholars, asking them about various different issues in life, from business transactions, marriage, divorce, aqidah issues, even everything else in life. All matters of life, they will be referred to those who are qualified to speak on Allah's behalf. And it continued in this vein until our lands, obviously they became secularized, and the role of the scholars and the mufti was restricted to only a handful of Islamic sciences, such as the laws of nikah, such as the laws of marriage and divorce and inheritance perhaps. And so their role was restricted to such a degree that perhaps 90% of a person's life became irrelevant to whatever the hukm of Allah entails, became detached from the Sharia. But alhamdulillah, as anyone can see, and obviously we don't need to repeat it time and time again, we can see that there is general awakening amongst the people, not only in the Muslim world, but even in the West. However, what we require in this revival and this awakening is that we have a source who we can refer to. That it is required from us that we revive this tradition of fatwa. And it is required especially from all of us to understand our role as muqallids, our role as those who follow the scholars, as to how to deal with the scholars, how to deal with the fatwas, who is a scholar and who is not a scholar, who to approach for fatwa and who to abandon. And this is very important, because not understanding this topic has unfortunately caused a lot of confusion amongst the minds, amongst many people. So you have many of those who are not qualified to give fatwa take up the position of ifta, take up the position of giving verdict, speaking Allah's behalf, while they're not qualified. And they issue their verdicts. And often their verdicts lead to destruction. Often the layman, he thinks that this person is qualified to give a fatwa, and he takes his fatwa and he acts on it and ends up destroying his life or damaging his life in a way that will, you know, the mark of that will probably remain with him till the day he dies. Or the effects of that are to be seen on the rest of the community. And this is a result of people not qualified to give fatwa taking up the position of ifta, or people, the layman generally, raising people to the level of issuing verdicts while they're not qualified to do so. And therefore it's very important for us to understand this topic. Before I go into this topic, firstly, as I said, giving a verdict means speaking about Allah Azza wa Jal. And when one speaks about Allah, he has to speak with knowledge. For speaking about Allah Azza wa Jal without knowledge is the door to shirk. And this is one of the reasons why Ibn Qayyim rahimahullah regarded it to be something worse than shirk, because every shirk, in fact every act of speaking about Allah without knowledge leads to shirk. In fact, every act of misguidance, you'll find that, you know, people were misguided because they spoke of Allah Azza wa Jal without knowledge. And they thought that the process of giving fatwa is something very lenient, something very light. And this is why it's been a tradition amongst the scholars throughout Islamic history to be very careful while speaking about Allah Azza wa Jal without knowledge, that they laid down conditions and guidelines for people when to speak and when not to speak, and so on and so forth. And this sort of tradition of being careful when speaking about Allah Azza wa Jal was actually taught to us by the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. And the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam had direct link with Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala. He was at the receiving end of the revelation. Yet at the same time, when he would be asked about an issue, he would wait until he received revelation, and then he would respond. For example, when the companions asked the Prophet ﷺ, which are the places that are regarded to be the worst of places, he said, I would not know until I asked Jibreel alayhi salam. I would know. I don't know until I ask Jibreel alayhi salam. So when he asked Jibreel alayhi salam and he informed him what it was, he went back to the companion and said, the marketplaces are the worst of the places. And this is the most knowledgeable person of the ummah, who says, I do not know, and I would not know until I ask Jibreel. And indeed the companions who were graduated in his university, and amongst them the leader Ibn Abbas, the scholar of the entire ummah, he used to say that anyone who's able to answer all questions thrown at him, he's the most stupid of people. His student Ibn Sirin, he would say that no one responds to people's fatwas, no one answers people's questions, except that he's one of three categories. The first category is of people, or of the one who knows the nasikh and the mansukh, that which abrogates from the Quran and that which is abrogated, meaning he generally has understanding of usul al-fiqh and how to derive Islamic rulings by looking at the evidences, meaning he's qualified to give a fatwa. That's the first category. Second category of a person is someone who's the leader of a community, so everyone looks up to him. And there's no way for him to run and hide. He has to respond to people's queries. He has to respond to their answers. He has to provide solutions because he's the leader. And so therefore it's a case of necessity. He has to respond to the people. So this person, he gives fatwa. And the third person who gives fatwa is a stupid individual who takes up the responsibility of ifta for no good reason, unnecessarily burdening himself with the responsibility of ifta. And look what Ibn Sirin said. He says, I'm not from the first two category. I'm not from the one who knows usul al-fiqh that deeply and is a scholar. Nor am I a leader of a community, and I hope that I'm not from the third category of people who unnecessarily burden themselves with this responsibility. Then you had the rest of the imams, for example, Abu Hanifa rahimahullah. He would be asked about issues he would not know the answers to, and he simply say, Allahu alam. Or la adri, I do not know. And amongst the four imams you had Imam Malik, and he's the most famous of the scholars in regards to this issue and how strict he was. Often he was asked about issues and he would say, I do not know. And then the questioner would say, but this is just a lenient issue. And he became angry. He said, there's nothing in this religion which is light. Having you heard the statement of Allah Azza wa Jal, indeed we revealed unto you a heavy statement. One of the Salaf, they said about Imam Malik that when he will give fatwa, when you speak about Allah Azza wa Jal, when he will become a signatory on Allah's behalf, he will place himself before the fire of hell and paradise and then speak. And then you had Ash-Shafi'i, who was the reviver of his century according to Imam Ahmad. When he would be asked questions, he would not respond. And people say, why aren't you responding? He said, I would not respond until I know what is better. Whether for me to speak is better or for me to be silent. His student Imam Ahmad, he would be asked questions and he would respond, I do not know. And al-Athram, one of his students, he says, this is in spite of the fact that he knew the difference of opinion amongst the scholars. He could have said, As-Thawri said such and such, Yahya al-Qattan said such and such, whatever else. Many of us do that. All we do is just narrate fatwas of scholars and difference of opinion. And the people who do not know these opinions, they think, oh mashallah, this person, he knows. But Imam Ahmad knew the difference of opinion. But he would not respond to the questions, he would not give fatwa until he's independently researched an issue. And sometimes he will be asked questions and you say he would not know. So many times, Abdullah, his son, narrates, so many times he's asked questions, he says, I do not know. So the people, they say, who do we ask then? Who do we ask if we don't know? He says, ask the scholars. And this is who? The Imam of Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah in his time. Saying, ask the scholars. So in spite of the fact that Salaf are qualified to give fatwa, they're qualified to speak on Allah's behalf, they hated and they disliked taking the seat, taking the position of ifta, taking the position of fitna and great danger, speaking about Allah Azza wa Jalla without knowledge. And this phenomenon that we have, many people, for example, becoming muftis of their own accord, without being qualified. This actually existed at the time of the Salaf. One of the Salaf, for example, he was found crying in his room. So his companion asked him, "Why are you crying?" He said, "I've seen something which is new in Islam, which has never happened before. Someone who is not qualified to give fatwa was asked for a fatwa today. And because of that, he was crying and weeping." He said that some of the people who give fatwa are more deserving to be imprisoned than thieves. Ibn Qayyim, he narrates about Ibn Taymiyyah, his dear Shaykh. He says that some people, when they objected to him that people, those who give fatwas, the muftis, they should have someone overlooking what they do to make sure that they're doing their job properly. Someone to supervise them, supervise the muftis. So they objected to him, "Why are you asking for supervision over what the muftis do?" And Ibn Taymiyyah, he said in response that, "SubhanAllah, you have people supervising over cooks and bakers, yet you have no one to supervise over a mufti?" And this is one of the guidelines that the Salaf left for us, is that the person who speaks the most, the person who is always ready to give fatwa, is the least qualified of people to give fatwa. And the person who remains silent on these issues, and he fears Allah Azza wa Jal, and he balances, he puts his statement and his fatwa in an equation of Sharia and a balance of Sharia before he speaks, and he's careful when he speaks about Allah Azza wa Jal, then this is a sign of a person who truly really fears Allah Azza wa Jal and only speaks with knowledge. So you have a obviously group of people who are not qualified to give fatwa, they take up the position of ifta. However, there's another group of muftis. And these muftis, or these fake muftis, they're not as obvious as the first category. These muftis, you usually find them, for example, university campuses, or talks and lectures and so on and so forth. And you find them getting involved in knowledge-based debates and so on and so forth, declaring something to be halal or haram, as if they're muftis themselves, while they're not realizing what they're doing is really shining fatwas on Allah's behalf. That's what it is. Saying this is halal and saying this is haram is being signatory on Allah's behalf. That's why Ibn Qayyim rahimahullah titled his book what? I'lam al-Muwaqqi'een. It's like a proclamation to al-Muwaqqi'een, the signatories on Allah's behalf. Because that's what essentially speaking about Allah Azza wa Jal is. Saying that this is halal and this is haram. And this is the very thing for which the previous nations were condemned, like the Jews, who took something, made something they want to make halal to halal, and something into haram. So Allah asked them, Allahu adina lakum, is it Allah Azza wa Jal who's given you permission to do that? Am ala Allahi taftarun? Or are you, making up rumors about Allah Azza wa Jal that this is halal, this is haram? And therefore, speaking about Allah Azza wa Jal without knowledge is a very, very dangerous issue. And for one to be a mufti, he doesn't have to take up the seat of ifta in a sense that, I'm the recognized mufti of such and such area, and you ask me a question and I write down my answer and I'll sign my name underneath and this is fatwa. No, this is not the only form of fatwa. As I said, for a person to say this is halal, this is haram, is fatwa. So we need to know rules and regulations of who is qualified to give fatwa, who is supposed to approach for ifta, and who is supposed to leave. Firstly, the obligation of a mustafti, or mustafti is the person who is seeking an Islamic verdict about an issue that he faces. His obligation basically is to find out the ruling of Allah Azza wa Jal. Okay? And in certain cases it becomes obligatory upon him to refer to scholars. When does it become obligatory? It becomes obligatory when a person is faced with a new situation and he doesn't know the ruling of Allah Azza wa Jalla in that situation, and therefore it becomes obligatory upon him to ask a mufti who is qualified to give fatwa regarding his situation. And sometimes it's merely permissible and recommended if a person wants to simply increase his knowledge to ask about things that are not obligatory upon him there and then. For example, if a person becomes a Muslim, it becomes obligatory upon him to establish salah, and therefore it becomes obligatory upon him to find out from a mufti how to pray. If a person wants to get married, it's obligatory upon him to find out how to get married. If a person wants to make hajj, it becomes obligatory upon him to know the rulings of hajj. Election times, person doesn't know what to do. It is obligatory upon him to refer to a qualified person who will be able to tell him whether it's permissible or not permissible to vote. And if you're able to understand this concept, it will get rid of a lot of confusion that exists amongst us. Many people, they do the right things or the wrong things because they're confused, because they're receiving conflicting opinion from people. Oh, some people say this is halal, some people say this is haram, and this person is completely confused. If you were to just look back and say, okay, who said this is halal and who said this is haram? And then he finds out those who are saying this is haram or those who are saying this is halal are non-scholars, non-muftis, then his job becomes very, very much easier. He's not obliged to follow non-muftis. It is haram for him to follow non-muftis. So he's left with an opinion. And unfortunately, many of the confusions that are spread amongst the Muslims are because of this. People not qualified to issue verdicts on Allah's behalf, taking up that position and speaking about Allah Azza wa Jalla without knowledge and confusing the masses. But the onus is upon the masses to learn who to ask, to give the scholars the respect they deserve and the position they deserve, and to take away this position of scholarship from fake muftis. So, firstly, our responsibility to ask someone who's qualified. I'll just quickly mention those people who are not qualified to give fatwa, what the scholars mention. A person, for example, who learns a madhab deeply or deep enough to understand what is the strongest opinion in the madhab, what is not the strongest opinion in the madhab, for example, someone who masters the madhab. Is this person qualified to give a fatwa or not? Majority of the scholars, they say this person, because he's making taqleed, because he's blind following his imam, even if he's mastered his madhab. Imagine that this person has read books cover to cover from the small books to the medium-sized books to the voluminous books. He's covered them all, but only restricted to his madhab. So this person is person of knowledge we're talking about. We say imam of a madhab perhaps of his time. Majority of the scholars said this person is not able to give a verdict. Why? Because he's a blind follower of his madhab, and his issues or his verdicts are not based on ijtihad. His verdicts are not based on independent, independently reached opinions. Rather, he's just making taqleed, and taqleed is not knowledge. Taqleed, or making a blind following anyone, is not knowledge. I'm not saying that it's allowed or not. We're not talking about that yet. We're talking about what actually taqleed is. Taqleed is not knowledge, it's jahl. And it is not permissible for anyone to pass a verdict on Allah's behalf based on jahl. And therefore majority of the scholars from the Hanafis, from the Shafi'is, Malikis and the Hanbalis are of the opinion that such a person, in spite of his knowledge, he is not able to give a verdict. Rather, the mustafti, the layman, should refer to a person who independently has access to the revelation, and independently he derives the rulings without blind following a madhab. Second person, for example, who is not qualified to give a fatwa is a person who reads a book or two in a madhab, for example. Or not even a madhab, a person who possesses fiqh sunnah at home. And he's read all 4 volumes, for example, that are available in English. Is he now able to give a fatwa in what he's read? Obviously, if the first category is not able to give fatwa, then the second category is even more so not able to give fatwa. However, the scholars do say if a person doesn't have access to a mujtahid, at all, he cannot reach to them for whatever reason, then in such cases it becomes permissible for the layman to ask these people. Because otherwise, if he doesn't ask them, then he has no way. He has no way to find another hukm of Allah Azza wa Jalla. That's the best he can do. And from that angle, these sort of people that I'm mentioning who are not qualified to give fatwas traditionally became known as muftis. Even though technically they're not muftis. They're not qualified enough to speak about Allah Azza wa Jalla. And even more so, the prohibition is applied to a person, for example, who possesses books of hadith, let's say Sahihain, for example, in the Arabic language. Scholars dispute about this person. This person, is he able to just pick up Sahih Bukhari and Sahih Muslim and say, well, this is the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, and I'm giving fatwa based on that? Can he do that? And obviously the answer to that is no. Because it is not enough for a person, for example, to collect and gather all the evidences in a subject matter without having the tools required to derive a ruling, such as the knowledge of the Arabic language, the knowledge of grammar itself, the knowledge of usul al-fiqh, to know what is am and what is khas, and so on and so forth. It's not good enough having all the evidences without having the tools as to how to deal with them, how to know which is abrogation, which is not. However, Ibn Qayyim makes an exception in this rule regards to issues that are clear-cut issues, and the evidence to them, to those issues are recorded as definite evidences without any possibility of any other understanding. For example, if a person were to ask, do you when you pray, for example, do you have to recite al-Fatiha? Then a person, a layman, for example, if he knows the evidence in a clear-cut issue like that, yes, a person has to recite al-Fatiha because there's no salah for the one who doesn't recite al-Fatiha, and so on and so forth. Something as clear-cut as that. But that's just theoretically speaking. Practically speaking, something like that usually doesn't happen, because these sort of things people usually know about anyway. Likewise, the issues to do with aqidah issues and issues of tawheed and so on and so forth, these sort of issues we're not supposed to make taqleed anyway. So, the issues of tawheed and so on and so forth, they're out of the scope of our discussion today. So when you're giving da'wah, for example, calling a person to tawheed, that is out of the scope of our discussion. So you don't have to, giving da'wah to a kafir, for example, it says, so why do you think Allah deserves to be worshipped alone? Well, just wait, I'll find out from a scholar. You don't say that on these issues. These are fundamentals of religion. Okay, so our discussion is only related to really fiqhi issues more than anything else. An issue related to the process of seeking ifta, a side issue really, is the type of questions that a person is able to ask. Before actually going into that, since we're talking about people who are not qualified to give fatwa, there are other types of scholars who might be technically qualified to give a verdict. However, there are other reasons for which they might not be able to give a verdict, such as, for example, if a person is a fasiq. If a mufti is a fasiq, he's known for fisq, and fisq basically a person who doesn't, just general definition of a fasiq, basically a person who lacks in performing his obligations, or for example, he misses his rawatib on a regular basis, he doesn't pray rawatib at all, or involved in major sin and so on and so forth, or doesn't adhere to the qualities of muru'ah in whatever country he's in. So this sort of person, he's not to be referred to. Second person, for example, he's not to be referred to. What the scholars talk about is a careless mufti. An indication of a careless mufti, even if he's qualified to give fatwa, that is, even if he's mujtahid. Indication of that careless mufti is when a person, for example, asks him, can I take out mortgages, for example? I'm in such and such situations. Well, we are living in such a country and difficulties and so on and so forth. So, no problem, inshallah. You can take out mortgages. And this is, I'm not saying taking out mortgages is halal or haram. I'm just giving you an example of a situation where the mufti, instead of going into detail and inquiring about the situation of this person, he's very careless in passing fatwas. So he just makes halal or haram, you know, based on whatever he hears from the mustafti without actually going into detail. A careful mufti, however, is the one who would inquire from this person, aren't you able to get a job, for example? Aren't you able to get a rented accommodation? Aren't you able to do this? And he'll look for alternatives. And before he has exhausted all these alternatives, he would not resort to the halal or haram issue. And this really concerns us more than it concerns the mufti. Why? Because when it comes to our health issues, none of us would like to go to a doctor who is careless in giving you prescriptions. When it comes to our health issues. So if you go to a doctor, for example, and say, I've had this headache for last week and I don't know what it is. Like, oh, okay, just speaking to a brother, I can't remember actually what scenario it was exactly, but he just mentioned that there was I don't know, he's a doctor or he's just a health checker or something. He entered upon him and he says, "Assalamu alaikum, brother." "Alaikum assalam. How are you?" He said, "Alhamdulillah." Okay, you're fine. Just wrote a certificate that he's fine health-wise and so on and so forth. You get a lot of doctors like that, for example, who just who are not bothered about your health, who want to quickly write off prescriptions and just want to just write the prescriptions, hand over the prescription to you, and that's they've done your job. They've done their job. That's not something, that's not like an ideal situation for a patient. And a patient, if he's clever enough, he would not refer to this person again. And the matter of religion is more dangerous than just a matter of health. So a person who really cares about his religion would not go to a reckless mufti who would carelessly, hastily pass his verdict. Only a reckless mustafti will go to a reckless mufti. And likewise, we should beware of the scholars who seek wealth and status, who seek prominence. Imam Ahmad al-Hanbali, he wrote to one of his students, and in a very concise letter, and subhanAllah, it has a lot of meanings in it. And it has this awe that exists in that letter, these words if you heard them. He said, "Assalamu alaikum," from Ahmad ibn Hanbal to his student, I can't remember his name. He said, "Know, may Allah have mercy upon you, that this world is a disease. This world is a disease. And the sultan, the ruler, is the cure. And the alim, the scholar, is the tabib, is the doctor." The world is a disease because no needs explanation for that. The sultan is the cure in the sense that he established the hudud, he established the punishment, and cures the society by establishing the hudud of Allah Azza wa Jal. And the doctor is the one who gives a verdict with this person, he deserves the punishment or he doesn't deserve the punishment, and so on and so forth. He said, if you see a doctor pulling to himself the disease, then beware of him. Wassalamu alaikum. One sentence, and such a great admonition. Ibn Taymiyyah, he commented on this verse, commented on this statement, saying that this is an indication that a person or a mufti who seeks world and status should not be referred to for any religious affairs. Coming back to our the point that we made, that a person must look for the mufti who is qualified to give a fatwa. No mufti who is qualified to give fatwa generally is a person who is able to reach Islamic ruling independently. Okay, and he's what they call either mujtahid mutlaq, in a sense mujtahid in all sciences, or a mujtahid in his madhab perhaps, or even mujtahid in an issue. A person, for example, who's recognized authority in zakat issues, he's to be approached in affairs related to zakat only. And it is an obligation upon the mustafti not to go to anyone, for example, who is known for giving fatwa. Yeah, or for example, whoever places himself in a position to ask him fatwa, he's still legally responsible for seeking out the one who is qualified to give fatwa. how does a mufti find out who is qualified to give fatwa and who is not? And that's an important question. And the scholars have given various solutions to this issue. They say that a person should look at, for example, who is famous amongst the people generally for giving fatwa. And those who are famous, brothers and sisters, there are two reasons a person of knowledge may become famous. A person of knowledge may become famous due to his general benefit to the community, or due to his track record. That person has studied under certain scholars, and he has, people know him to be a person of knowledge, a person, who's an all-rounder, for example. Some people are, even though they might be scholars, they're knowledgeable and even qualified to give fatwa. However, they become famous due to controversies, not due to their benefits. And in fact, in many cases, people who are non-scholars may become famous due to controversies. And that's the question a mustafti should ask himself before he approaches this mufti. How did this mufti gain his position? Did this mufti gain his position, for example, because he was called to Channel 4 to speak about controversial issues? Or was it because this person is generally known for his benefit in the community? So that's one issue. Secondly, a person, for example, another way you're finding out who is qualified to give fatwa is by referring to a knowledgeable brother, for example. Trustworthy, knowledgeable brother who's a student, for example, in Sharia, to ask him, is there any mufti around that I can ask about my religious affairs and so on and so forth. And so his judgment can be trusted. These are the two main ways in which the scholars say a person can find out who is qualified to give a fatwa or not. This one issue I really wanted to cover is basically what happens when a mustafti, a layman like myself and most of the people here, what happens if he receives conflicting fatwas from qualified scholars? And that happens a lot. Okay. Firstly, we have to understand that because we're discussing this topic, and this topic is applicable to the layman, naturally it calls for some sort of ease in understanding of this topic. So really, Sharia asks you to do that which you're able to do. It doesn't ask you to do that which is beyond your ability. So for example, if the scholars differ, and you're someone who cannot really look at the evidences, weigh them out and say, okay, this is perhaps a stronger opinion than the other, then in that case, all you're obliged to do is look at the scholars and ask yourself, which of the scholars are perhaps most knowledgeable of the scholars? So if you think, for example, scholar A and scholar B and scholar C, they both pass verdicts, conflicting verdicts, and you're not able to look at the evidence and see which one is stronger than the other, then in that case you trust who you think is the most knowledgeable of these scholars, and you follow his fatwa, and you're not to be blamed for that. If, for example, you're someone who's able to look at the evidence, of the issue is so simple that you might be able to look at the evidence, then in that case you should look at the evidence, and you should follow the fatwa, you should follow the verdict which you think is the closest to the hukm of Allah Azza wa Jal. This is just a very general guideline to that. However, if you're not, for example, you're not able to weigh between the fatwas, and you don't know which of the scholars is the most knowledgeable, then only in that situation you should refer to your heart. In that situation, provided that you're a person of taqwa, not a person who's going out, for example, fatwa shopping, you should refer to your heart. Due to the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, she said, "Istafti qalbak, or istafti nafsak," that ask yourself, وَإِنْ أَفْتَوْكَ وَأَفْتَوْكَ أَفْتَوْكَ. Even if the people were to give you fatwas again and again and again, ask yourself, because whatever wavers in a person's heart, a heart which is full of taqwa, then for as far as he's concerned, then this is mahdhur, this is something he should not approach, even if the rest of the people regard it to be okay. Okay? And that's when the issue is not clear-cut, issue is not backed up with evidences. However, when the fatwa of a scholar is given by a qualified mufti and is backed up with evidences, that in those situations a person should not leave that fatwa because I don't feel comfortable with this fatwa. Because many of the laymen, for example, they might not feel comfortable with the fatwa the way the Sahaba sometimes were not comfortable with the fatwas of the Prophet ﷺ. However, they followed whatever the Prophet ﷺ told them to do. Many times, for example, you might be traveling to a place and and you want to make qasr and jam', for example, and a layman who's never heard about this, and you tell him that we can make qasr and jam', for example, while you're praying, and he says, well, I don't know about this opinion, I think it's safest for me to pray 4 instead of 2, for example, because that's what I feel is closer to the hukm of Allah Azza wa Jalla. No, something like that is based on jahl. And if you were to take that approach, there will be no purpose of Sharia. There will be no purpose of fatwa, seeking fatwa in the first place. And so this settlement of the heart on an issue is only applied to areas where the issue is not clear-cut and a person is completely confused and he's not able to weigh it between the evidences, nor is he able to weigh it between the scholars and say who is more knowledgeable than the other, and so on and so forth. 5 minutes. The last issue really I wanted to touch upon is the issue of madhabs. It's like a general understanding, I think, amongst many of the people from India and Pakistan, or even other places in Egypt and Syria, that if a person, for example, is a Hanafi, he should ask the Hanafi scholar. If a person is the Shafi'i, he should refer to the Shafi'i scholar, and so on and so forth. So, what do we say about this sort of understanding, and is it correct or not? Well, to start with, most of the scholars, majority of the scholars on all 4 madhabs, and especially the Hanafis themselves, they say that the mainstream opinion is that amongst the Hanafis is that the layman, a person who's a muqallid, he has no madhab. Meaning it is incorrect for him to attribute himself to a madhab. Why? Because attribution of a person to a madhab must be based on something. If a person, for example, says, I'm a Pakistani, he can't be, for example, native Englishman. He's never been to Pakistan and just come up and say, I'm a Pakistani. There has to be some sort of link. He has to originate at least from Pakistan to call himself Pakistani. A person who claims he's a doctor, he has to have studied medicine to call himself a doctor in the first place. A person who's an author, for example, or as he claims he is, he must have written 1 or 2 books at least to be called an author, and so on and so forth. Likewise, a person who says a Hanafi or Shafi'i and so on and so forth, there must be some sort of sensible link between him and the madhab. But as it stands, most of the people who claim to be Hanafis don't even know who Abu Hanifa was, don't know the madhab, don't know the life of the Imam, haven't studied one of the basic fiqh books in the madhab to start with, to actually back his to support his attribution to his madhab. That's why scholars like Ibn Humam and Mullah Ali al-Qari and the rest of the Hanafis, even the contemporary Hanafi scholars such as Abu Ghudda Abdul Fattah, for example, or Wahab al-Zuhayli, are of the opinion that the layman has no madhab. Even if he says that I'm Hanafi, for example, or Mufti, give me a fatwa according to my madhab, then a Mufti gives absolutely no consideration to that. And really, if you look at the situation, for example, if you see a person coming out of the pub and he's drunk and he comes to you and says, I just touched a woman, can I just pray like that? Is it sensible for any Mufti to ask him, are you a Hanafi or a Shafi'i? A person coming out of a pub and he's drunk, obviously it's not sensible to ask him, because would the Hanafis or Shafi'is be proud of themselves having followers like this person? So that's what's important. Secondly, it's caused a lot of confusion amongst the masses throughout history, such that it's actually caused battles, wars amongst Shafi'is and Hanafis that actually ended up in the demolition of the entire city of Asfahan, as recorded in Ma'jam al-Buldan, for example. And the enmity that existed amongst Hanafis and Shafi'is amongst the scholars is written in their books. For example, Al-Juwayni, for example, will write a book insulting the Hanafi madhab and why people should follow the Shafi'i madhab. Then you came Al-Kawthari, for example, writing his reputation and insulting the Shafi'i madhab. Not only that, insulting, casting doubt on the lineage of Imam al-Shafi'i. And this is the reality amongst the scholars. So what do you expect from the layman? Moreover, it puts unnecessary obligation upon this layman. Because all this layman is supposed to do is seek the ruling of Allah Azza wa Jal. Know the basics of ahkam. Know how to pray, know how to fast, and so on and so forth. And before a person even knows how to pray and how to fast, it is illogical for anyone to say, well, you have to decide which madhab you have to follow before you do that. And this is the reason why majority of the scholars from all of the four madhahib are of the opinion that the layman has no madhab. And this is why when a person approaches a mufti, he doesn't have to restrict to a madhab and say, okay, since I'm a Hanafi, I must approach a Hanafi scholar, and so on and so forth. Rather, he should approach anyone who is qualified to give a fatwa. Just the last issue about, and this really falls under the category of.
I've just been informed that the reason for the poor quality sound is brothers' mobiles and walkie-talkies. So can they please be switched off?
Yes, off. Okay, the last point that I wanted to make basically is the question of asking and demanding for evidence. This become like a culture thing basically. Some people are known for that, you know, they go to a gathering and the mufti says the hukum of such and such and such is halal or haram and wajib or whatever. And a layman, for example, just in the crowd, what's your evidence? Something like that. What is the Islamic ruling about it? What have the scholars said about, for example, asking the mufti for evidence? Well, some scholars, in fact, they actually went to the extent, like a Shatibi, to say that the verdicts issued by scholars are evidences in the right of the mustaftis themselves, of the layman. Just as the revelation, the text, the divine text are evidences in the right of the mufti. And really, what a person or a layman like us is supposed to do, or is obliged to do, is to make taqleed of scholars, as long as we are not mujtahids ourselves. And therefore it becomes pointless for a person, for example, to demand an evidence. It is permissible, however, for him to demand an evidence from a mufti. Sorry, not demand, but to perhaps find out the reasoning behind the ruling, but in a polite manner. And therefore the scholars, even including Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah, they say that a person, when he asks for a fatwa from a mufti, and when the mufti gives him the fatwa, he should not stand up and say, what's your evidence for that? Because this is su'ul adab. This is bad manners to start with. Because the mufti is under no responsibility to give you the evidence. Because he might be someone who is not able to understand the evidences. Might be someone who becomes really confused. And so it is his right to withhold from giving you the evidence. This thought of, asking for evidence for every single fatwa, this thought that you have the right to do that actually came from, let's say, the Zahiri school of thought, where people like Ibn Hazm, for example, say it is prohibited, taqleed. They say taqleed is prohibited upon the shepherd living on top of the mountain and a virgin girl secluded in her house, just as it's prohibited on a mujtahid. This is sort of opinion. And obviously we have counter arguments to that. Is firstly, even if a person thinks that he's following evidence, and he thinks that, this person, I know this hukum and I know the evidence, and therefore I'm not making taqleed, I'm following the evidence, he's still making taqleed. How is he making taqleed? He's making taqleed in understanding of those evidences. Everyone knows the evidences, but how to utilize those evidences to come to a shari'i conclusion, that's the job of a mujtahid, the one who's qualified to do so. And this is why, even if a person says, I have the evidence ready, at the end of the day he's a muqallid. And most of these discussions that take place amongst some circles, for example, they all bring evidence, but the evidence for this is such and such, or the evidence for that is such and such. At the end of the day, they're really blind following their party organizations and so on and so forth. That's why a person, for example, he comes with an opinion. Before he even hears the evidence, he can tell, he's from that party, he's from that organization. And it's obvious, it's not hidden that, after 11 September, for example, one of the so-called muftis in this country changed his aqidah and position from being a Ash'ari Sufi, Ash'ari to Hanbali, Wahhabi kind of ideology, and he's became like one of the hardcore Najdi scholars who just write fatwas, and this person's apostate, kuffar, mushrikeen, and so on and so forth. And what is ironic is that overnight that happened, and overnight his followers also changed. From calling Sheikh Muhammad al-Wahhab, for example, a British agent, to the reviver of his century, and so on and so forth. So this is the reality. That most of us, even if we think that we have evidence and we have knowledge-based opinions, at the end of the day, we are muqallids. But what we to be aware of is, who are we actually making taqleed of? Are these people, muftis, have the right to give fatwa? Who have this studied under, for example? What is the qualification? Are they mujtahids? Who recognizes them as mujtahid, and so on and so forth? Or are we going to a fake doctor, for example, who will one day give us a prescription of death to eternity? It's a state of hopelessness. So these are the issues, some of the issues I think, if we try to learn and understand. Obviously I wasn't able to cover the entire topic. A topic like this cannot be covered in 45 minutes. But it's just an incentive for all of us to know our worth ourselves, who we are, whether we qualify to say this is halal or haram or not. And secondly, realize the worth of our scholars. Give them the position they deserve. Instead of us being the middlemen, for example, taking the fatwa from this website or that website and throwing to the people, I think this is halal, where'd you get them? Oh, I read it on this such and such fatwa website, for example. This is giving fatwa. This is, even if you're quoting someone, for example, without attributing to this person, is giving fatwa based on taqleed. So really knowing your worth, and let the people have direct relation with the scholars instead of us being intermediary between them and the scholars. So these are the two key points: knowing our worth, even when discussing amongst ourselves, and not being hasty and saying, I think this is halal, or I think this is haram, or people should not vote, or people should vote, and these sort of things, And likewise, knowing the worth of the scholars and those who are qualified to give fatwa, and giving back the position they deserve, because that is so needed in this country. And that will help us so much in clearing up confusion that exists amongst us. Only if you were to realize that, look, I'm just a muqallid and I'm supposed to follow the fatwa of mujtahids, and if you say this is haram, tell me of a mujtahid who says it's haram. If you can bring a mujtahid, that will be a matter of confusion for me, obviously. Then I'll just take the right discourse in sorting out this confusion. And if this opinion has no mujtahid behind it, I'm not interested. Simple as that. And you are free in the sight of Allah Azza wa Jalla. Less confusion for you. Islam is easy. Okay? And with that, inshallah, I end subhanakallah wa hamdika ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta astaghfiruka wa atubu ilaik.
If there's any questions that you've written down, and then brothers can pass them forward to the front. Again, we apologize for the poor quality of sound and try to sort that out. While the questions are coming, one announcement. The exit from this hall is down to the right hand side. Which is your
The question states, of the people you mentioned who cannot give fatwa, the scholar of a particular madhab, is this your opinion or that of your scholars? Well, I don't have an opinion. I'm not a scholar, I'm not a mufti. All I was doing is what is permissible for me to do, is to relate to you what the scholars have said. And if you refer back to the Shafi'i scholars, when they wrote on this issue, like Ibn Salah and An-Nawawi, for example, as well as the Hanbali scholars like Ibn Hamdan and Malikis, they are of the opinion that a person, as a rule, as a principle, a muqallid is not allowed to give fatwa, full stop. And a person, for example, is muqallid of a madhab, even if he might be the imam of his madhab, as long as he's muqallid, he's not allowed to give a fatwa. However, they said that what they mean, what do they mean actually when they say he's not allowed to give fatwa? Meaning he's not allowed to give fatwa independently. What is permissible for him to do, however, is to relate what his book states. So if he's asked a question, if he's approached by a layman in a case of necessity, it is allowed for him to refer to the books of fiqh and to answer with the most reliable position in his madhab. But that is a case of necessity, as it became throughout Islamic century because of lack of mujtahids and and obviously a lot of muftis of madhab. I mean, traditionally they became known as muftis, but technically speaking, what the scholars have stated, like Ibn Salah and Nawawi and others, technically speaking, a muqallid is not able to give fatwa at all, full stop. Allah knows best. Allahu A'lam. Yes, it's an important question actually. I wanted to mention that as well. There are differences in marriage law, i.e. between a Hanafi and a Hanbali law. Can you approach a mufti of any madhab for advice plus guidance to settle, i.e. divorce or disputes? In issues like marriage and divorce or property disputes and things like that, these sort of issues, they should not really be referred to a mufti. A person should refer to a qadi or a hakim, because as Brother Abu Yusuf, he said yesterday that the hukm of a qadi yarfa al-khilaf. These are the issues of khilaf, and especially issues where people's lives and honor and properties are affected. You should not just approach a mufti and just take a fatwa. Cannot break down his door. Just go and break down his door, break his nose or something like that, if it involves damages. Okay? So, these sort of issues, really they should be referred to a hakim or a qadi who's able to settle the difference. So regardless of whether he's Hanafi or Maliki, Shafi, as long as he's able to be a qadi, he's qualified, he should be approached. And his hukum becomes binding upon the disputants. That's what resolves the matter. So that's like a general guideline, inshallah, in regards to the fatwa issue.